Hi, welcome to Mr. Dyer's Musings. I'm Mr. Dyer, and today we're going to be taking a look at something that's pretty cool. And it has a long history, and it goes way farther back than the Boy Scouts of America when they started using it. And it's been utilized in various different circumstances and terrains. We're going to be taking a look at the trench lighter. Stay with me. As always, I'd like to thank you guys for taking the time for watching this video. If you're new to my channel, we take a look at artifacts and we examine them, we talk about their history, we use them if they're in good enough shape. As a social studies teacher, I wasn't always really interested in history. It wasn't until I had somebody come into my life and bring artifacts that really got me psyched about our history. And I use the artifacts in the same way. To try to connect you, to try to connect others with our history, so then it's a little bit more interesting than just names, days, places, and events. Yeah, I have a ton of videos about the American Civil War and early Campcraft. Usually I try to dress in period attire of what we're talking about, but this week I'm at summer camp with my troop, so I only brought my contemporary scout uniform with me. And if you notice, my epaulets are missing the green shoulder tabs, because one of my scouts lost theirs, so I gave up mine for his. So let's take a look and discuss the trench lighter. Now, I already did a video on the marbles match case. In the early 1900s, the Boy Scouts of America started putting out catalogs, and in those catalogs they sold things to help scouts with outfitting themselves. And not just scouts, but also scout leaders. One of those things is the marbles match case. The link to that video is up here. But in the early catalogs, the early 1920s, they also sold this style of trench lighter. Now this goes by a lot of different names. It goes by a shepherd's lighter, it goes by a sailor's lighter, it goes by a match lighter, it goes by a rope lighter, which that makes sense, right? Or it goes by the trench lighter. And we're going to break those down, and doing so I think will help us break down its history and its purpose or its use. We're going to start with the match lighter. Now, before the cap lock was invented for rifles, before we had systems of locks that like the Henry lever action or the bolt action, even before flint locks, they had what were called match locks. And matchlocks used a piece of rope like this, and all it is it's a slow burning fuse. And you would light that with the flint and it would stay burning. You know, it's a slow burning fuse. So when you hit the trigger, that fuse would be brought down. And that's a pretty fancy lock. Even before then, the really old guns, they would have a fuse that they would hold on to, and they would just themselves touch it, and that would ignite the powder that would be in the pan, that would ignite the round. So that's why it was called a match lighter, because it used a slow match or a slow fuse, slow burning fuse. It was also called a sailor's lighter. It was very popular among sailors because it was considered windproof. So as the wind kept blowing, it's not going to extinguish the flame. In fact, it's just going to make the ember more red and more hot. It will burn more of the rope, but it's not going to go out. So that's why it was called a sailor's lighter. It's also called a shepherd's lighter because shepherds would take, again, the slow fuse, and they would use that to light their pipes as they were out in the field. And it didn't create a bunch of light. You could still have your night vision. There's just a lot of practical uses to it. It wasn't going to get, if it got wet, it was fairly easy to dry and reuse. So there we have it. Now, the trench lighter. Now, the trench warfare here in the United States really saw its first appearance in the end of the American Civil War. We used Napoleonic warfare tactics pretty much throughout the American Civil War. But by 1862 and 1863, war kind of changed from Napoleon's tactics, because the rifles that were used, the guns and the ammunition, and they started developing grenades, they just didn't suit the style of warfare anymore. So they started using more entrenchments and then digging in and taking more defensive situations. And so with the trenches, that carried over into the Spanish-American War a little bit. It also certainly carried over into World War I, when the machine guns completely decimated lines of marching men. It certainly didn't make sense then. So entrenchments became the popular method of fighting during World War I, which is why we had the stalemates, and we had the Western Front, and the stories of how terrible it was in the winter, and the trenches even in the Alps. And even today they're digging out artifacts from those trenches up in the Alps. It's pretty cool and insane at the same time. But a trench lighter was used because it didn't give away your position. Because all it did is just have an ember. It had a glow instead of a bright flame. Now, they did have petrol lighters during World War I, but it was the trench lighter that became more popular because of that. Now, soldiers, they did trench art during World War I, during the American Civil War. I don't know how far trench art really goes back, the term trench art, but it was really popularized during World War I because you had a lot of time just sitting in the trench with nothing to do. So soldiers would take bullet casings and they would actually make their own trench lighters using slow fuses. And that's what they would use to light their pipes in their cigarettes or cigars or whatever, their tobacco products, light their fires if they're going to cook, things like that. Alright, so that's the history of the trench lighter. You can still get these. Not this particular one is an antique, but you can still get trench lighters pretty affordably online. Okay, so you have your tube. The tube is what holds your rope. As you can see, the rope comes up and it comes down. I put a knot in here just so it wouldn't go completely out and limits it. You usually have a cap or something that's connected to the top that will extinguish the ember after you're done using it. All you have to do is just pull the rope and it brings it back up. So this does have a little ball and it has a hook that hooks into the rope itself. Now you do have to char or light the end first before you use it. If you have just a new rope like this and you keep flicking, the steel will, or the steel and the flint, it's not going to catch. Because ultimately this really does act like a char cloth. When you're done, like I said, you close it. Now most of the trench lighters have a spot where you can put new flints. To do that, all you have to do, this one has a spring, you pull this without losing my flint, it comes down so you can replace your flint. Alright, so when you're ready to use it, pull the ball out, get it about level with where your spark's going to be, like so, and you light. I keep pulling it down a little bit too far. See if you can see that. So as you can see, it'll stay lit, and if the wind's blowing, all it's going to do is just keep it going. You can see it's pretty red right there. And that's what they would use to light their cigarettes, their cigars, or in a scouting situation, they'd light their fires because they have their flint and steel already in. And it doesn't take long before it's extinguished. I can touch it and it's cool to the touch. It's not hot at all, so it's pretty safe. Now this particular company, this one is Bowers Army and Navy Lighter USA in Kalamazoo, Michigan. This is one of the most popular ones that you can find on eBay. They came in brass, they came in gunmetal, which is what this one was, and they came in, I think, a aluminum, which I believe what I read online, the aluminum ones are pretty hard to find if you're a lighter collector, but this particular one is a fairly common one. So there's your trench lighter. Pretty useful. You know, even today for scouts, it's actually kind of neat to have to throw in their fire kit. You should always have at least 2, preferably 3 methods of starting a fire whenever you go outdoors. Your first one should certainly be just like an open flame lighter, because if you can't get something started within about 10 seconds of using a lighter or less, then you probably need more tinder or something else to light. After your lighter, perhaps then a ferro rod would be a good one. And this would honestly actually be a pretty good substitute even for a ferro rod, because you got the ember. The problem though with this, it gets a little tricky handling this and your bird's nest at the same time, because usually when your bird's nest goes out and it finally ignites, it can kind of whoosh, ignite all at once. So a ferro rod and some ferro rod is hot enough that it can actually catch a lot of different types of dry tinders even without charred cloth. Then you'd have flint and steel. Your last resort should be your friction fire, your bow drill, because that's going to burn a lot of calories. So if you can't get something lit with a lighter, matches, ferro rod, trench lighter, flint and steel, then you're in a pretty desperate situation. You probably shouldn't have been outside, out in the woods to begin with. There you go. I hope that was interesting to you. I hope you found it kind of fascinating a little bit, or you learned something about it. Nothing else about its history and how the troops and different people used it. The relationship between this and the Boy Scouts of America, which I thought was pretty cool, seeing that in the old catalogs. Please leave a comment. Please like it if you do. Please share it with others who may like history, may like artifacts or antiques, or who like B.S.A, if they like Campcraft, Bushcraft, outdoorsy stuff. If they just like artifacts, or maybe just listening to my voice speak and teach you a little bit about history. Hope you guys have a wonderful week. Give a kiss and hug to your loved ones, and take care. Thanks.